My name is Deak, and I'm a paleo artist. And what is a paleo artist, or what does that term even mean? It means that I study the past, primarily human evolution, human origins, and utilize whatever I can, clay, pencil, paper, pixels, to revisualize and bring back that world. Since we can't travel in time, I thought it'd always be neat to bring the past to us, and so that we could study it, see it, and understand it, and to try to find, I guess, a common thread between us all in a field and in a world that is very tangible and something that we can all experience in a very similar way. So my process usually begins with, if I'm fortunate enough to get my hands on a skull, or this case right here, this is a reconstruction of Lucy, and usually we just begin with the fossil evidence. But this is sort of a field and kind of work that imagination can only come in a little bit later, only after we've extrapolated a lot of information, poring over papers, poring over books and literature and films and whatever you could get your hands on to get as much information as possible about a particular fossil or a particular hominid. Once I have examined the fossil material, from there I generally have to rework any distortion found in the bone or in the groups of bones or in the skull. I study it for a little while longer, and then if looking at the original fossil material, I begin to see markings and grooves as to where muscles should attach. And I'll use the skull as a roadmap to lay out all my areas where I know muscles will begin to grow from, or where muscles are attached, originate, and insert to. Then I begin to just carefully lay on, piece by piece, individual muscles, and the whole time checking up against literature and past work of myself from dissections. There was things that you can just see in books, but you can never know them until you actually feel them. And it's when, it sounds kind of gross, but really by working through those layers of tissue on the face, do you really get the sensation, the feeling of what is actually going on there. But basically, going back to the literature just to double check myself in thickness and tissue depth measurements, just to make sure that I'm within a certain range of muscle tissue depth, that I'm not going too thick or too thin, but that it's within a mean. But then once the muscles are reconstructed on the face of the skull, and sometimes on the rest of the body, then a layer of skin is sculpted on, and that is where a bit more artistic license comes into play. But how old the individual was upon death, what were the environmental conditions of their geography in life, what was their food source, what was it possibly a bountiful food source, were they, is this the kind of thing that was scavenging or foraging or hunting? So all these different factors start to play into how it starts to formulate, I guess, the vision of just the exterior skin surface on these individuals. Once that is done and the head has been sculpted and reconstructed, there's a stage of mold making and then casting, and it's the casting that will be put on display once it gets the proper cosmetics, hair punched in, glass eyes inserted, and mounted and so forth. Depending on how excited I am personally on the fossil skull reconstruction, some of them could take a week, some of them have taken 6-7 months. Then usually from there I can take it a step further, generally photographing the whole process, and by this photography I can then go back later on to use this work and these heads in digital work. A lot of the heads and a lot of the faces created from the mural were done with this slightly older method of reconstructing from the bone to the skull, and then the digital photography, and then the digital photography was then brought into the computer, and through Photoshop it was enhanced a little bit. Textures were added, hair was painted on, the lighting was tweaked, and an environment was actually built based off of more photography done out in South Dakota, Wyoming, and Puerto Rico. But again, like that artistry really comes in trying to make it clean and tight and well rendered, and then think about the compositions and so forth, the lighting and so forth. But never is it really about how they're going to look. You know, that comes from within the fossil. Ultimately, it all comes from having a strong understanding of the fossil material and ape and human anatomy, because without ever doing any of this hands-on work, any of that digital work would be, not that it would be impossible, but it wouldn't be as honest or truthful, and it would be more invented, and it would be more of an artistic rendering over a forensic reconstruction or a valid revisualization of these hominids.